Hi, I'm Steve Kep, co-founder of From Day One, our forum on corporate values. In today's webinar, we'll be exploring a very forward-looking topic, which is HR and the CEO, the most critical relationship for success in 2021. This year has forever changed the role of human resources. All of the disruption and uncertainty has shed light on the importance of having an intentional people strategy. If it wasn't clear before, taking care of your people and ensuring that they have the right resources is critical to achieving business objectives. As we head into 2021, HR leaders and CEOs need to work together and align their business and people strategies. In this conversation, we'll pull back the curtain on the thinking of leaders in both of these roles and what a successful partnership looks like. Emplify's CEO, Santiago Jaramillo, and Chief People Officer, Adam Weber, will be sharing their perspectives on what's needed to set up your organizations and people for success. They'll be discussing things like decentralizing people initiatives and enabling managers to create engaged cultures, how HR and C-suite teams should work together to achieve business excellence, and the new way of thinking about talent development. Before we dive into this topic, we'd like to thank our partner, Emplify. I'll tell you a little about them. Emplify is a data-driven employee engagement improvement solution that helps executives and HR leaders make better people decisions and improve business results. Informed by science and psychometrics, Emplify is the first to fuse a software platform, agile process, and expert human strategists into a data-proven employee engagement system, one that's focused on achieving iterative business transformation through simple, actionable, and timely cultural measurement and coaching. Now, a few quick logistical items. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand soon after the event, so you can look out for an email in about 24 hours with the link. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credits for this session from the Society of Human Resource Management. And look out for a written account of the conversation soon on our website at fromdayone.co. In the last 10 minutes or so of the webinar, we'll have a Q&A session. You can submit your questions anytime using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now I'd like to introduce our excellent moderator, business journalist Lydia Dishman, who reports and edits for Fast Company on tech and leadership, and has written for CBS Money Watch, for Fortune, and the New York Times, among others. Okay, Lydia, over to you and our speakers.
Great, thank you so much, Steve. Thanks for audience members for spending your hour with us. We hope that you will gain a lot of value from this very timely discussion. So here's what we know. Study after study has revealed that productivity has not suffered during the pandemic. Whether on the front lines or working from home, workers responding to many surveys have stated that their productivity has stayed the same or even improved. Unfortunately, rising productivity during a pandemic has a downside, and that's burnout. Emplify's data shows that 63% of employees on its platform are reporting burnout, and there's been a 10% drop in engagement. More broadly, the most recent Gallup poll indicates that 54% of workers are not engaged. Given the fact that many companies are going to continue letting employees work remotely into the next year, it's never been more important for managers to support their staff so they can continue to be productive and engaged and not get fried in the process. One of the most efficient ways to achieve this is to ensure that the CEO and their HR leaders are aligned so they can empower managers and team leaders. So here with me today to discuss these best practices are the co-founders of Emplify, who, as Steve said, also happen to be the CEO and the Chief People Officer. Santi, Adam, welcome. Can you introduce yourselves briefly and tell us a little bit about your working relationship? Santi, let's start with you.
Sure. I'm Santi Jaramillo, and I'm originally from Cali, Colombia, and I have a passion for this very topic that we're talking about, and been pursuing it. Wrote a book called Agile Engagement. It's an Amazon best-selling book, all about how companies can create really flexible and collaborative and innovative cultures that yield really high employee engagement and high performance, but more than that, actually help people unlock their potential at work and work for more than just the paycheck. And so that's why I do what I do, is to help people unlock their potential at work, and I get to play the role of a chief executive officer at Emplify. And I've had many of these, several of these HR CEO relationships before, never before with a chief people officer, never before with somebody in the C-suite, never before with somebody with truly a seat at the table that's looking at it from a really strategic lens. And that's offered me a really interesting vantage point of how can we develop really amazing aligned relationships between the business folks and the HR folks. And many of those I hear from other CEOs and many times from HR folks, that they wish they had a better relationship, that they were more aligned with that. And this has gone so well with Adam that thought this would be an interesting topic to explore together about how we can help others have a few insights about what we're seeing in the data for how we can do this much better moving forward. Because I think it's more critical than ever. Lydia, you started hitting on it with all the changes that the last 6 months have precipitated and accelerated that were already going on. This topic is of utmost importance now and for the next year.
Thank you. Adam, so what's your working relationship with Santi like?
Sure. Well, hey, everyone, I'm Adam. I'm co-founder and chief people officer here at Emplify. And one of the fun things, by the way, is that Santi and I both do talks all the time. We've been doing startups and businesses together for the last 8 years. I think this is the very first time we've ever both done a talk together. So it's just fun to get to spend time together too. I think, for us, we're both practitioners. So this is kind of a topic that's near and dear to our heart, in that we both run our own business, but we also run an employee engagement company. So we really sit at the precipice of that HR and CEO relationship and the work that we do every day. I think for the two of us specifically in our relationship, this is our second business we've had together. We've got a solid, trusted working relationship. And it's interesting because when we started our first business, we didn't actually know each other. But we saved a lot of time because of that natural values alignment between the two of us. And I think that trust really actually saved us years in the beginning of our first business. I've kind of viewed our two roles, and I don't know, Santi, if you agree with this, but I sort of view that we've always kind of had these two roles. Like I've been a bit of the cultural heartbeat, making sure our people are cared for, making sure the atmosphere of our company felt a certain way. And Santi's been a good challenge to me in that he always represents kind of the practical, strategic needs of the business, the pace and urgency required to achieve goals. Like I think in a vacuum, I've told him in a vacuum, I was like, in a vacuum, I'd run a mediocre nonprofit. Combined together, it makes for a really successful partnership. So hopefully I kind of call it the head heart combo, and we sort of work together. And I think it works because we both know that we need the other person to bring that out.
Yeah, I've heard that great leaders have a strong back and open heart, and it's both of those things. And one without the other doesn't really work. And Adam, we both have both. We both have backs and we both have hearts, but our natural growth path is the others, if that makes sense. And I more naturally come from sort of the strong back, and I have continued to learn and grow in my ability to show up with a true heart for people. The Marines talk about this. I'm not a Marine or anything, but they said mission first, troop always. What do you do when a soldier is left in the battlefield, but going back for that soldier would compromise the entire mission and potentially the national security of the country? That's the hard decisions that leaders and commanders have to make, is how do we balance those two most important things, the mission of the business and the people, which always and that tension is present for us with Adam. And it's really the dance between those two really equal priorities, because if we always prioritize people, we could go out of business pretty quickly and not give those people a job. But also if we prioritize the business always, people will see that and they won't invest their heart and mind, and without that, what's the point? And so I think that's what makes us good together. And I think that's one of the things, I was thinking, why is Adam a strategic HR people ops executive? Why is he? What about him made me extremely comfortable and fortunate for him to step into the role that he's in? And one of those is that balance of the mission, business, and the people, that he's willing to grow on his side of it, just like I'm willing to grow on my side of it. Number one. Number two is being data driven. I think that's really important. That's the language of the C-suite, is data. And so his previous career and experience makes him a data-driven leader, and that earns credibility and trust with me and with others that he has to be effective with. Number three, he focuses on engagement, training, and development and managers. And instead, the classic sort of traditional non-strategic HR was really in the bookends of the employee experience, hiring and firing. It's sort of how to hire people and how to not get fired. But that whole middle part of when people are actually employed, that's a major point of his emphasis and focus and how he naturally thinks about this. And in fact, Adam isn't that involved in some of the risk management parts of needing to terminate an employee, and we let other, the CFO, do that, and our director of HR. Number four, a high acumen and business acumen. He understands business. I don't necessarily think that great strategic HR leaders always have to have non-HR careers, but I think that they do have to have high business acumen. They have to understand the business, be able to see it from a business lens, understand the vision, understand financials, to be able to be effective in their role and to have credibility with the folks that they're going to be working with, those line level managers and executives. And then lastly, partners with me on the first team, the senior executive trust and health. And I think that's for me, that's what makes Adam an excellent chief people officer. That's what makes him a strategic people ops professional and executive. And so I thought I would kind of outline some of those things as I was thinking about this, of why does it work? And I think it's the presence of those qualities in a chief people officer, why he is in that role.
Making me feel great too. Thank you for that.
I was going to say, if you don't get a raise after this. But of all the founders, and I've been covering startups and large organizations for years now, and the very best stories of the most successful businesses are how there's this synergy, especially with co-founders, and many of them have likened it to a good marriage. And we know the foundation of a good marriage is trust. So, and the head and back thing too. I need to tell my husband that. So, but all of the positives aside, that would tend to make one think that there would be a natural synergy, as you so eloquently expressed, Santi. But that's not the case at a lot of companies. So why would challenges or tensions arise between these two leaders, especially counterintuitively as they're working toward the same objectives?
For me, I feel like there's two main things, and I do get the privilege of getting to talk to other HR practitioners like myself. And there's a couple traps I think that happen naturally. One is, too often HR intuitively knows what the issues are inside the business. They really feel that heart component. They have a pulse with it. But where it starts to fall short, or where they have a hard time enacting change, is practical data. It's ROI. It's taking the time to build the business case to get other people on board. And then what happens is it plants this disconnect that grows over time, and it manifests itself in this way. The most common question I get at every single talk I do is, well, what do I do when my CEO is not on board with this? And that moment is there are definitely CEOs who have that kind of heart that isn't open-minded to it. I have found data is the most powerful way to keep that conversation open. But more often than not, I genuinely think it's those small moments where the HR person is aware of the disconnect, or the people ops leader intuitively knows, and then doesn't take the time to build a practical ROI case, doesn't take the time to use data and build the business case to gain alignment with the rest of C-suite.
I think one of the things to take ownership on the CEO's end is many times we don't bring the HR leaders into the context of the business. And then we get frustrated that they don't come to us with proposals for new expenses and investments that line up with the objectives of the business. I remember, a particular conversation in the past of speaking with not Adam, but a different HR leader. Of course, I'm not going to name them, but and it was like, well, we should invest in, I forget what it was pet insurance or something like that. And I have pets. That sounds like a great idea. And I was like, well, tell me, why is this the best way to spend these dollars, right? You have limited amount of dollars to spend on our team. And we have this business strategy and we've got to hit these goals. And so tell me how this investment supports us succeeding as a business. Because at that point I was like playing CFO as well. So I had to be really rigorous, right, about how we were spending every dollar. And it was like, I don't know, because like I talked to a sales rep from this company and I thought our people would love it. And it was just like, oh my goodness, like what a miss. But part of it I realized reflected on me. Part of it was on me that I didn't bring that person into the context of the business. And so they didn't know how to tie it, to the business case. So I think it's both ways, right? A CEO's inviting and giving context of the business and what it needs. And then HR leaders getting much better at making business cases and tying the solutions to the problems that they so clearly see and feel to how it's going to help people and thus help the organization as well.
And Lydia, I had one other thing I wanted to add to this as well, because I think a trap sometimes for CEOs is that they often hear only the positive things for sustained periods of time because of their role power. And the challenge and what can cause tension is that HR often knows the truth and the CEO doesn't know the truth. And it's interesting, Santiago, it was just a month or two ago, he said something to me like, one of the things I appreciate about you is that you're always willing to tell me the truth. But that takes a lot, and we put in the work to earn that trust. And I know in a lot of businesses there's not that trust. So you have tension because HR is aware of a truth that the CEO maybe isn't aware of. And so how do you create environments where the CEO is open to name those blind spots or willing to name their own growth paths as well to help the business move forward?
I don't think there's ever been a more exciting time when their alignment and that trust can be built than right now. Thinking in December, thinking about 2021 and in this pandemic moment when CEOs may be thinking a bit more openly about this. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this. I think there's a specific way that there can be shared ground here to be found of something that the CEO knows is important, something that the HR professional knows is critically important. And how do we find shared ground and start to build some trust around that?
Well, particularly because both of your roles, you have the ability to support and empower managers. But it sounds like there's a little bit of even though we are at this inflection point, there's some old school thinking around how to do this and some new school thinking around how to do this. Trust, to quote a very famous movie from a long time ago, if there were any logic to our language, trust would be a 4-letter word. And I do think that this is a key issue. So can you talk a little bit about your perspective on that?
Yeah, we will. And the core concept here is really that culture doesn't live in the C-suite and in HR. Culture is what exists. High performance cultures exist at your company. And so how do you take this relationship and actually mobilize it? And so we'll give you just kind of a high level walkthrough of how we do that, and then we'll move back over into that Q&A, more Q&A. But at the highest level, the values of the workforce have changed. If you think 30 years ago, there were no millennials in the workforce. Today, it's the largest segment of the workforce, and it fundamentally shifted how every generation thinks about work. It used to be the HR function matched what the values were of the workforce: stability, benefits, compensation, hiring, firing, all the things Santi said earlier. But today, the average employee, here are the 4 most important values: the cultural values of the company, the leadership and management, like authenticity and availability of leadership. Can I grow here? Is this a place for me to grow? And is this a purpose that I align to? And since those are central now, the challenge is that the workforce changed, like the average worker changed, but leadership did not change or hasn't caught up to the value change that exists in the workforce. And what I mean by that, and I always share about Frustrated Frank, this is a real person. Both these two people are real people. One of the first times I gave a talk about this value change in the workforce, I was in Buffalo, New York. This guy's wearing a brown suit with a giant necktie. And he stands up in the middle of my talk and he just goes, I'm just so frustrated. Like I'm trying so hard, but my employees, they don't have work ethic anymore. They'll leave on a dime. They want to be involved in every decision I make, and they care more about the life and the work-life balance. And like his face was getting redder and redder by the second. And at one point I had to remind him that I was the one giving the talk and I was hoping to continue. But you empathize with this because this was a leadership style that was predicated on the Industrial Revolution to meet the needs of a different culture that is now failing, and it is wreaking absolute havoc on our society today. And if you go, you see how, yeah, go ahead, and you can see how this impacts is that if you think about the highest level, a whole bunch of first-time managers are now thrown in without soft skill training. And what do? Who do they start to mimic? They start to act like the Frustrated Frank, the only example of leadership and management that they've seen. And we're not creating high performance teams. We're creating staffs that aren't engaged. And so they're not as productive as they could be. We're not like investing in our people as well. And so what we're going to talk about, and Santi will transition over to this, but it's a different way to lead. And Motivated Michael's also a real person. And it was really a singular conversation that unlocked the trajectory of my career and set in motion the work that I do every day. Why for me, I started Emplify. I had entry-level job after entry-level job for 10 years. And I stumble into this sales job. I had some kids. I was like, I got to provide for my family at this point. And on the very first day, my new boss says, his name is Michael, of course, I don't care when you work. I don't care where you work. I am curious, if you truly set your mind to it, what are you capable of creating for our business? And that freedom and that belief, it unlocked in me really what I'm capable of and why I started becoming an entrepreneur and all of these things. And so, but what you see in leaders like that is a new way to lead. It's what I call leading like a human, which is the book I wrote. And it's all about this concept of creating managers that unlock the very best in their people. They're transparent, they inspire the best. And so practically, I think Santi's going to walk through just some ways to like, how do you actually do this at scale inside of an organization?
That was well said, Adam. Thank you. And, we've been speaking with lots of HR executives, and we also have the privilege of looking at our own data. We've collected millions of data points about what engages employees. It's what we do. And we've been able to understand that there's been a significant shift just in the last few years that has happened in how the best HR teams are thinking about creating highly engaged and high performance teams. Before, they used to think about it from this lens of survey and compliance employee engagement at best. They were gathering some data, they were doing some top-down thing, and they were doing their best with it, but many times they were at it alone. And they would then, administer the survey, and then afterwards, action had to be taken based on the data, right? If you don't act on a survey data, it's almost better that you don't do a survey at all. But the way it would happen is they would then have to go and get manager compliance to now participate with their HR program of employee engagement. And it didn't really work. They were at it alone, and managers would just reluctantly comply with this because they would say, listen, I have these priorities. I have these goals for my manager, the director of VP of sales or marketing or whatever, HR. I don't report to you. And now I'm taking orders about stuff I need to take from the survey. And it left the HR person kind of singularly and alone in caring for employee engagement. And but now what the best leaders are thinking about this, they're flipping the script and thinking about this through a different frame. They're thinking about, instead of manager excellence, how do we have amazing managers that are owning the employee engagement in their teams and the employee experience, and are really committed and owning the role that they play in truly leading their team, not just managing the bits and pieces and the process and the numbers, but actually leading from a human perspective and engaging and inspiring the teams under them. And so why is this change happening? Well, it's been happening for some time now, but it's because of what Adam said. I'll briefly repeat that. The fundamental reasons of why people go to work somewhere and stay there and give their best have fundamentally changed. It used to be comp and benefits, and now it's culture, values, leadership, management, and growth and development. So we know that. It's a study by Glassdoor. And when we look at who actually delivers these things on the left in an employee experience, if we visualize that, this is what it looks like. HR in yellow. HR plays a super important role in the organization. In the candidate employee experience and in pre-hire, hire, and initial onboarding, really massive influence. But then after initial onboarding, it's truly the manager that has the overwhelming influence on the employee experience. After that, they spend one-on-ones with their manager. And now, even more so with COVID, when the office experience is now gone, now for some, now it's a remote experience, and the importance of that manager is even more important. Certainly now that so many more things are competing for people's time and attention and energy, whether they're political, social, pandemic, kids studying, doing e-learning at home, whatever that might be. Now a manager needs to, in D&I, diversity and inclusion, social issues coming to the forefront, a manager now not only needs to organize the work and assign the work and edit the work, but now they're caring for the emotional and psychological well-being of their teams many times. And so we're seeing the organizations literally our engagement scores of the ones that are not investing in manager excellence. They're seeing significant dips in employee engagement scores. And there's other statistics that show that a lack of emphasis and attention on this topic is costly. We all know that people join companies and leave managers. It's just what you think about your own visceral experience of having a really bad manager. It almost doesn't matter how much you get paid, how much you love the organization's purpose. If that person that's managing you is making your life miserable and is an energy vampire in your life and just sucking away your souls and dreams, it's sort of almost nothing else matters if that relationship isn't in order. We also know from our own data and Gallup's study that 70% of employee engagement variability is dependent on the relationship between the employee and the manager. So that's really significant. And what's wild is 60% of managers fail in their role in their first 2 years. That's over half of them. And this isn't even just like first-time managers. This is just all managers. It is really hard to care for, manage, and organize complex, emotional, psychological, intellectual human beings that come from different backgrounds with different motivations and different life experiences, all to pull together toward a common goal using a shared set of core values and pulling toward a shared goal. And this all happens despite senior executives knowing that manager development should be super important. Most CEOs I speak with viscerally know that managers are super important to their business objectives. And then when I ask them, hey, what do you do to actually develop your managers? They're mostly embarrassed about how little they do. And Adam and I, we were super embarrassed about in our first startup that we did around how much we knew this, but how we didn't act on it. And it was because we wanted to. It was just really hard to do. And it's really hard to do. It's okay when you have maybe one manager or maybe two managers, but you start to get to 5 or 10 or 20 or hundreds of managers in an organization, and developing managers is really hard at scale. Number one, how do you influence all those managers to actually care about owning their own development? Because if you don't own your own development, it doesn't work. It's like pushing spaghetti. It's not going to go anywhere. How will you actually gain C-suite alignment? What Adam was talking about, that frustration in the HR side that, hey, I know what needs done, but I get blocked, or I don't get funding for this, or the solution doesn't get approved. How do you get the decision makers aligned on investments that make the most sense? How will we support personalized manager development? Because what we just talked about, my development as a leader, as a manager, is different than Adam's. It's actually the opposite, right? My way is more open heart, and Adam's way is different, and we need different things. And going through cookie cutter manager training is a waste of time, because I don't need 80% of it, but 20% I really need. And that's a different 20% than what Adam needs. And you start to multiply that times 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 managers, and all of a sudden you have these almost endless permutations of development plans, which are really hard to support individualized development paths for all of these managers. And then maybe most importantly, how will you know if you're making progress? How do you defend that investment to invest in it the next year? How do you repeat that business case and say, look, this is how it's working. This is what's going well. This is how it's impacting the business. This is where it's not. Here's what we're going to do about it. And how do you measure that? And this is how bad managers play out many times. Either great managers leave because they're not developed, they're not growing, they don't feel like they're getting better at leadership. And so they leave. And then many times you end up losing the team under them because they loved their manager. Or first-time managers, many times they were the best individual contributors. I mean, I did this, and we've all done this. We have an all-star individual contributor that does the work amazingly, and then we promote them to a manager position of that job. And it's the Peter principle, where we promote people into their sort of limit of their competence, and they wreak havoc across the organization, because just because you could do the job doesn't mean you can manage humans to do the job and lead them. And then we all know that really amazing individual contributors can be just held back entirely by a poor untrained manager. And when we started kind of looking around, why is this so hard? And it's because you have to cobble together all of these different things to make personalized manager development work at scale. We were doing this survey thing at Emplify in the beginning, surveys alone, and we realized that, wait, just reminding people of what's wrong over and over, it doesn't make that much of a difference. You actually need change to happen, and human behavioral change is hard to do at scale across multiple people. And so just having data isn't enough. And HR leaders are feeling this. There's survey fatigue, not really because it's survey, it's action and change fatigue that people have. People would be happy to answer surveys if it led to real change, but many times they don't. And then certainly you're going to get kind of coaching or training, but again, they're not based on the specific individualized growth paths of each person that are many times really, really different from each other. And so what we figured out is that there's a set of best practices that we want to sort of open source and share with you all. And regardless of whether you work with Emplify or you cobble together your own set of solutions to make this work, there's a series of steps that are proven to be effective that we know if these are followed, it will yield improved and measurable employee engagement increases, high performance team improvements, and ultimately business objectives getting realized and results being delivered. So what we see here is that the first step is gathering important context, doing a baseline measurement, employee engagement measurement, because employee engagement is the outcome of good management. And so let's measure the outcome of what good management is supposed and leadership is supposed to yield. And let's use that to create an opportunity to have a conversation based on data between CEOs and business executives in HR about what are the real problems that we're facing in the organization. Because what Adam said before is many times the problems are known by the HR person, but it's convincing the CEO that those are real. That's the challenge. And this data does the convincing. I have my own personal story of I was leading in my first startup. I was leading. It was very stressful. I was selling 2 business units. I was the VP of marketing and the CEO. I was really just stretched thin, and I was pretty cranky, and I was just not having great interactions with people. A couple of them quit, and basically in their exit interview said it was basically, I just can't work with Santi anymore because he's really tough to work with. And my HR person at the time tried to warn me. They said, hey, you're doing this thing, it doesn't really work. And I'm like, this anecdotes, like we're going through a tough business time, people don't like it, they're upset and they're complaining about me. Like, tell me more anecdotes and feelings, please. And it just, I wasn't ready to receive it. And then we did our first engagement measurement. And then the data we saw, second one, and we dropped 50th percentile points. And a lot of the drivers that went low were the ones around authenticity and shared values and things that really pointed to me. And I had a sort of I cried in my carpet that night and just realized, like, oh my gosh, it's me. I had like this waking up moment, and it was data, that sort of woke me up to the reality. And without it, I might not have trusted, the feedback and sort of the subjective stories that had validity, but just didn't have data. And my CEO brain was highly trained at, sussing out data from anecdotes and learning how to read sort of signal from the noise. So this is the most important part, is actually aligning between the HR and the CEO. What are the most important issues facing the organization, and what are the consequences that we are seeing from managers not being excellent right now? And then from then on, it's sort of the most fun part and the easy part when you do the hard work of the foundation, which is actually to develop and coach. And coaching, if you've ever experienced a life coach or an executive coach or any kind of great coach, you know that it's hard to change ourselves as human beings many times. But when we can have somebody outside of us, a therapist, a counselor, a coach, that can ask us really smart questions and we can come to our own conclusions about how we need to change, that can be a really, I think, the only way that we can sort of repeatedly and continually change as people, and continue becoming a better version of ourselves, or our real version of ourselves, that can show up in the world in the best way possible for others. And so, these are some of the best practices. Adam, do you want to add any context here? I've been talking for a little bit. You want me to keep going on this, or anything you want to add, or keep going?
Nope. Yeah, I say, cover this part in a minute or two, and then we'll move over to the Q&A part too. So.
Great. So like I said, it's first gathering context, measuring employee engagement here. The important part is to make it a science-based assessment. Number one, number two, it's really important that it's truly an anonymous survey, and that the employees know that their information is confidential, because if they know that they're going to be outed by being honest, and they're not going to be honest, and we're not going to be able to rely on the data. So that's why it's important to work with like a third-party survey administrator like Emplify or somebody else, versus doing it. What we don't recommend is doing it in-house, and because everybody thinks that IT knows who answered what, or pulling questions from the internet and calling it a scientifically valid measurement of employee engagement. Your data is only as good as the questions that you ask and how safe people feel in being honest with it. The second part is aligning around what are the main focus areas, because no doubt there will be 100 things that we can chase. But what the best companies and the best HR leaders do are really disciplined and focused and strategic. Strategy means saying no to 98 things and going all in on the 2 things that really matter the most. And so this is all about it, is creating a strategy, creating focus, and most importantly, having that focus be aligned between the HR person and the CEO, or whoever the HR person reports to, the CFO, COO, CEO. When that happens, 80% of the battle is won because there's fundamental alignment around what the focus area should be. And now it's about simply executing and making improvements around that area. Many times it helps to have a third-party facilitator that's outside of the building to look at the data and help facilitate that conversation. Again, this is something that we provide at Emplify with our people insights consultants that every customer gets. But you also can hire somebody externally to sort of look at your employee engagement survey and help facilitate a conversation around this. Just make sure they have previous experience doing this, because it can go off the rails if it's not done effectively and done well. And then this is really cool part, is you can actually create personalized development paths for different managers. So Sally here in the top probably needs some deep coaching, because she's got to work on psychological safety and trust for her team. So that's a pretty deep kind of thing. So she needs she'd be better served by some coaching. She just went remote, and people are feeling that. So she's going to be presented with a remote management course, online course, and she's going to get a book, Adam's book, called Lead Like a Human, to know how to bring more of that authenticity and humanness and that connection as part of that. And that's different than Ralph, and that's different than somebody else, because again, each person has different development paths. But then the most important thing, and maybe if you don't gather anything else from these best practices, maybe remember this, is human behavioral change happens best with a coach. We've seen in my own life of how to grow from some of the trauma that I experienced in my 10 years in the 90s in Colombia, which if you've seen season 2 of Narcos, that's Cali cartel, that's where I grew up. And so it was a crazy time. And so I've had to overcome, lots of things in my own life to show up in the best way possible for me. And time again, for me as a person, as a human, for me as a CEO, for others, a coach is an invaluable investment to make in our own development. And it's what actually causes change, because it's somebody that has previous experience with this, that can give you honest guidance, that can ask you really great questions, and then it can hold you accountable. Not in the way that your manager can hold you accountable, that they can fire you if you don't do what they want, but just, hey, you said you wanted to do this and you said this would be good for you. How are you doing with this? And know that I'll ask you a week later. And just knowing that I'm going to be asked this next week, all of a sudden, creates some accountability for me to think and pause and say, do I have a different choice to make here? That's the right choice. And so some of those are some of the best practices of how to do manager development well. But the main point here is manager development can be that shared ground that CEOs can have with HR folks, but it's really, it works when done well. And there's a few steps and best practices that make that happen really, really well. And the companies that are doing this are thriving, even in this business environment. And the ones that are not, those cracks in the foundation of managers and disalignment and lack of trust between CEOs and HR, those are only going to have more of a magnifying glass put on them, and those cracks will become wider and wider the more that this way of working continues. And so it's an amazing opportunity and a huge threat, and the time is now to align around this.
I have many questions now. But before we jump into those and jump into the audience questions too, because I keep seeing them popping in, we're going to pause briefly and have Steve come on and do a little commercial break for a second.
Thanks, Lydia. Hi, everyone. I'd like to remind anyone joining our webinar in midstream that we're from day one, and today we're exploring HR and the CEO, the most critical relationship for success in 2021. Our sponsor is Emplify, and our speakers are Santiago, Jaramillo, and Adam Weber. As a reminder, you can submit your questions at any time, and we'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A session in the last 10 minutes or so. Also, you'll get a link to the video recording via email within about 24 hours. Now back to you, Lydia.
Thank you. Yes, that was a predominant question. A lot of people asking for a replay of the slides and if it was going to be available. So no attendees, that you will be getting a link to the recording in your inbox, so you don't have to do any heavy lifting. So one of the big questions I had was about this notion of alignment. How do you work together to set a company goal? And then how do you actually figure out what the goal is going to be? So that's all a matter of alignment.
Yeah, I think, I mean, are you saying with goals as it relates to like the culture and how you're driving the culture? Or are you just saying goal setting kind of globally?
No, I'm specifically talking about people goals. So
Yeah.
For example, engagement and accountability, as you mentioned, Santi, just, what are you looking at to say, okay, this is what it's going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, that's part of where this data comes in, is like, do we have base level people KPIs, and so we align to make sure between the two of us, we have our top 5 people KPIs that we're aligned on, and then we report with regularity around those. And I think it really takes those foundational KPIs to be in place in order to have that kind of mutual, like, what would we like to improve? And then knowing we want to improve things, what are the initiatives that need to take place in order to drive change or enact change inside the business?
One of the smartest things that Adam ever did, for me at least, for his effectiveness as our organizations, is he convinced us to make the Emplify score, the employee engagement score, and we obviously use our own product for this, to make it a top 3 company KPI. Up there with revenue and profit is Emplify. And that is a wonderful way to align goals, because it's like, all right, we know what the measures are that matter, revenue, cash, and employee engagement. And so it has as a top priority, and it's amazing how that alignment happens when you have a shared goal around that metric. And we see that in our customers, the customers that convince that decide to make employee engagement metric a top 5 company KPI, see dramatic score increases, because they simply have focus on it, and they're looking at it, and they're creating strategies against it, and they see then the impact of that number on profit and revenue.
I want to dig into the nuts and bolts of measuring engagement as it relates to what you're talking about. When you mentioned earlier, like, don't just Google like what survey questions would be and then kind of take it from there. I mean, obviously you should not try this without professional assistance, but for those in the audience that may be a department of one, what are like some baseline things that they should be looking at?
One super quick thing is the difference between engagement and satisfaction. I think that we have been misled for the last 20 years that what we should care about is employee satisfaction. And employee satisfaction is this like, am I satisfied? It's like NPS, like, am I willing to basically like, am I satisfied in my role with my pay and comp? Am I just basically, am I status quo and comfortable? And it's employee satisfaction is an entirely different psychological condition than engagement. Satisfaction is like, I'm leaning back, I'm getting my paycheck and doing the bare minimum, to get by. And I'm sort of not growing and not leaning in and not pushing. And there's employee engagement, which is truly my heart and mind are in this, and I'm leaning in. And every day I'm waking up and I'm saying, hey, with my limited time that I can work today, what are the best ways that I can make an impact on the mission today and on the customer or the team or the employees? It's a very different thing. And so the first thing is actually making sure we're measuring the right thing, which is employee engagement and not employee satisfaction. And a lot of the stuff that's out there are questions from 20 years ago with outdated psychology, because that's the best we knew how to measure 20 years ago was satisfaction. Now we can actually measure the heart and mind sentiment that that a person has for their work and their employer. So that's like one quick one that comes to mind, is measuring the right thing.
I think the other, I mean, if there really are people on here who are a department of one, it's thinking practically like, what work do I want to take on? And most of us who are in HR got into HR to create cultural change and activate change inside the org and not be administrators. And so you kind of, think about the system you put in place and do I have the resources and support to actually enact change? I can't tell you the amount of situations where I've heard of an internal person, department of one, ran their own survey, found out something really hard about someone above them inside the org, and now they're in a really difficult situation. And so that's one of the benefits of a third party who can share the truth about your org and without putting your job at risk. And then where you then, instead of trying to play the political game and convince people, are actually the one who is solving the problems, which is usually why you got into this business in the first place.
Last piece is frequency, is we're a book called Agile Engagement. And the old way used to be that a company would measure employee engagement, do a employee survey every 3 or 2 or 1, every 1 year. And it would play out like this: you do a survey and then it takes you 2 months to get the data back, and it takes you 1 month to talk about it and 2 months to get the action plan. So you're like 6 months in after the survey, and you finally take it down to executives or managers, and they're like, half these people don't work here anymore. The world is totally different from 6 months ago, and we're just like catching up with the 6-month-old data. Like, it's a different world. And we're seeing the best companies now put that into the kind of a quarterly cycle many times, or a couple times a year, and start to work for a more agile way of getting data and taking small actions versus once a year and trying to sign up for 50 massive things.
Because we have so many questions from the audience, I'm going to actually start to pull some of these now, and I'll shelve my own for another webinar. But a lot of people are asking in a variety of different ways how to get buy-in. So if you could both please go over again, if there is a misalignment, what is the best way to get buy-in from the CEO?
And what's interesting is I had actually, this is the number one question that I get in everything that I do. It's how do you get buy-in? And I would say there's a couple things. Number one is, this is why like step one for us is data and alignment. Like, executive teams are willing to hear hard truths when it's factual and it's not you. It's actually like it's data. And so data is really critical. That's why the first step to guide any initiative is data driven. It's not intuition. It says we are confident with data that if we invest in this plan or program, it will drive this outcome for our business. So that's foundational. Sometimes people go, how do I convince the CEO that engagement data matters? And I think there's a step before that, and that's where you get into business casing. And by enacting change that is focused, you typically can drive performance 20, 25%. You can reduce turnover 15 to 25%. You start to think about every employee you lose. Just if I'm teaching a quick version of how to do a business case, like is every employee you lose at your company costs you 100 to 100, between 80 to 150% of their annual salary based on kind of their skill level inside the business. So the math adds up very quickly to show that if we're focused in the initiatives we use, then we will drive change. So usually you go business case, run data, align executives, and now I have permission as an HR leader to put in place all the things that I knew needed to be put in place. But now I have permission and I'm not feeling that friction. And hopefully, I think I was looking at the Q&A. I think I tried to answer 3 of those because they were all very similar. So hopefully
yeah, no, I think you did great. There were a few that were very similar, but here's an interesting one that I have not seen. So thank you, James. How do you align employees with leadership? I've not seen it flipped that way.
Sure. There's a set of if you can imagine 2 Venn diagram circles. And there's a set of actions that are good for employees, and there's a set of actions that are good for business or leadership or whatever. And then there's a set of things in the middle that are good for both, like having really clear roles and job descriptions. That is something that, boy, when your role isn't clear as an employee, it is really hard to do a great job when you don't know where your job starts and ends, and you don't know what your performance is measured against. It can be really overwhelming. I think that's one of the causes of burnout is people don't know where the boundaries of their job are. And so they overextend themselves trying to do too much. And that causes really bad stuff in people. And so, that's also something the business really cares about. And so I think what engagement data does is when you measure employee engagement, you're inherently answering that question, because people generally want to have their heart and mind be in what they're doing. And I've never met somebody who's like interviewed with me and been like, what I really want is to be like pretty checked out, and like, I don't like want to be like, I want to not care about this at all. And I want to hate what I do. People generally want to do that. And so when you ask about employee engagement, you're inherently asking people, how can we help you be your best self at work? How can we help you be a healthier human so that you can bring your best at work? How can we help you get rest so that you come back refreshed and at your best? And so when those are the questions that we're asking, we're fundamentally sort of only asking questions that we're willing to take action on, because they're things that are good for business and good for employees, for the individual. Certainly if you do all stuff all the time, that's like you do surveys and all you do is just like squeeze people for more productivity, that doesn't work. Or if you do and you're just like giving free lunches and gift cards every day to people, well, that doesn't really work for the business side. But there's a set of things that serve both parties really well, and we see that's a bucket with enough to pull out from. The companies can keep doing that all day long, things that benefit the individual and the company at the same time.
One other thing with that is that all the employees are already in on the truth of the business themselves. They all know. What using good data does is it fills in executives and then gives them the opportunity and the chance to start speaking the language and speaking into the experience of the employees. And now we have a connection because leadership now is in on, and they understand maybe there's a weakness inside the business and all the employees know it, but now they know that leadership is also aware, and it creates alignment in that way too.
We have several questions coming in for or about smaller companies. So I know that I asked you about what about an HR department of 1, what recommendations, but here's one. Do you have basic guidance for the CEO of a small company, because having an HR manager is often a luxury that cannot be afforded?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
On this one is, this was the case for me in the first few years of my organization. Adam was the head of sales in the first one, and I was a CEO, and we probably both shared that role, and we took on that responsibility and shared it internally. I think for when that's the case, it's probably getting more help than trying to do it all yourself. As a CEO of a small company, you're probably pretty busy, and so making sure that you either go with a consulting firm that can do a pretty white glove experience and kind of do a lot of the services and work around this for you, like, coming up with the questions and helping you know how to communicate it with your team and analyzing the data and that kind of a thing, or working with a software provider like Emplify that embeds the human help right into the software and the human assistance, so that we do all the heavy lifting and then they don't have to. That's a shameless plug there, but there's other ways certainly to do that. So that would be one of them. One easy way for like a truly small company is start, stop, keep every month or 3 months with the culture. It's just asking people, what would you start doing with our culture, stop doing, and keep doing? That can be a really super lightweight, easy way to just get a quick pulse. Obviously, that has issues of super open-ended, sometimes not anonymous, but if somebody it's better than doing nothing. That would be something that I know that we did early on when we was like 4 people in a room and we all trusted each other. We could just ask like, hey, am I bothering you? And Adam was like, yeah, wear less cologne, maybe. That'd be great. And so.
Is that true? Did that really?
Awesome. So from toggling from from small business recommendations and getting buy-in, here's a question from Aaliyah. How do I make sure that as head of HR, the CEO includes me in the conversation on business strategies to identify the best ROI and align the HR initiative?
Yeah, that is, I do think the beginning to that is one, having that conversation. I think it's okay to be bold and say you'd like and ask what steps need to happen for me to have a seat at the table, and really communicating that change. We want our HR department to turn into a people ops department, a strategic part of the business, and hear from their perspective first, instead of trying to convince them. They probably have their own viewpoint there. And then the other way is just to, again, some of the things we talked about earlier, practically putting business cases and plans in place, putting a system like this in place that gives you data to back up your decision making, and that begin to earn that right at the table too. It is definitely something I think that's through mutual conversation. It's that is the CEO's decision, so it is a privilege that has to be earned, and it's earned through trust and credibility and kind of transparent conversations.
A quarter or half step to that is simply saying, hey, I hear you. Maybe I'm not ready to participate and have a seat at the table yet, but hey, could someone on the team give me like an update of what came out of it, at least, so I can ask some questions? And then at least there's awareness. Maybe the participation wasn't granted, but perhaps information afterwards could be. And that's not ideal all the way there, but that could be a small step in the right direction. And then that at least provides enough context to be able to create that business case.
We've got a couple of questions on coaching. One from Elizabeth is, I have 400 managers at my company. How much coaching does one need to improve? And then we have another that just says, how do you get buy-in for getting an outside coach? So a 2-part question.
Yeah, so it's a great question. We typically have three general use cases of how people think about deploying coaching. It never is, I think Elizabeth has 400 managers in her organization. It's typically never, let's start with all 400 managers and get them all a coach. It's just too big of an investment all at once. Not all of them want it, et cetera. So it's really about, how do we start with the highest leverage? How can we be really strategic about the managers that we choose? The 3 buckets are, number 1, good enough, but crazy high potential managers. We know that this person has future leadership potential. They're on a fast track to promotion. They're a rising star. They're pretty good, but man, there's just people that you just invest a little bit into them and they absolutely bloom. They're a sponge for growth. That is probably the best place to start. There are others that are first-time managers and are being put into places of significant manager influence, and those can go through a cohort of sort of new managers. Another one as well is those managers that are savable but really struggling. They read on the employee engagement heat map, and they're really struggling. Their team is really struggling, but they're worth investing in to try to sort of save them and rectify them. And those are probably the 3 buckets. What we do at Emplify when they work with us is we look at the data and we help recommend which managers we should start with based on the data and based on the institutional knowledge that the HR professionals and CEO does. And on the second question, it's amazing how fast the alignment happens when you're just looking at data and you're like, oh gosh, we have huge sales goals and our sales team is super disengaged. that's definitely one of them. And guess what? The CEO is pretty quick to agree to spend the, I don't know, couple $1,000 or whatever it is on a sales manager who represents $1 million of sales, quota for the next, period. And those folks are struggling with burnout, disengaged, and are about to leave. Data really clarifies sort of where to start, and then the buy-in happens when you have alignment around that. Basically, before data, it was basically like, hey, HR person telling me, hey, let's spend this data, or let's spend this money on this problem, and now I'm the one saying that is a bad problem. How do we fix it? Bring me a proposal that fixes that problem. What money do we need to spend on it? And that's a reversal of the old dynamic.
Well, I hate to say it because I could talk about this for the next 2 hours, but we are out of time. So folks, if you did not get your question answered, please feel free to reach out directly to Adam or Santi via LinkedIn or through the Emplify website. Thank you very much for spending time with us today. Steve?
Thank you, Lydia. And our wonderful speakers, Santiago Jaramillo and Adam Weber. That was a really thoughtful discussion, and judging by the number of questions, you produced a high level of engagement. Thank you again to Emplify and to all of you for participating today. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website, fromday1.co, and check out more of our upcoming webinars. I'll mention 2 of them. Next Thursday, December 10th, we'll be exploring how technology is changing employee experience. On Tuesday, December 15th, we'll be hosting our 5th full-scale virtual conference with panel discussions, workshops, and networking. The focus is on inclusive leadership in 2021, creating diversity, accountability, and real equity. We have a great cast of speakers lined up. You can visit our website at fromday1.co to learn more. Thanks, everyone. Stay well.